All right, greetings everyone. This is Jeff. This is my Science and Faith series part 5, where I talked about evolution. For those of you who didn't make the class, I did record that, but I decided I'm just going to reshoot it in here, change it around a little bit. So let's just jump into it. Evolution, should we believe it? Right off the bat, one of the biggest issues is theological. So in the class, I discussed this. I know it's a busy slide, but let me talk through these. The biggest one right off the bat was just undermining the Word of God. We want to know that we can pick up the Bible and then we can trust it. It takes the first 11 chapters of Genesis and makes them absolutely questionable. And they have to come up with theories. It was a myth. It was just an analogy, poetry. You have to come up with ways around it, even though the straight reading of it was as it was written. And all the early Hebrews believed that. The consensus among the early church fathers, consensus among everybody was that it was really written as history. And if you undermine that, just even the whole Bible becomes questionable. So that's a big one. Death before the fall. Okay, so we read in here that death did not come until the fall, and that's rather significant. This cartoon here on the right really says something very important. We're going to say that Adam and Eve were in a garden, and death did not occur, but yet underneath the rocks were supposedly pain, death, killing disease, thorns, that these all existed for millions of years before they came along, so the death was already there. Disease, pain, all that was already there. But when we read it in Scripture, the fall of Adam was very significant in that it changed creation. Romans even says that creation groans in expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. It says that all creation was subjected to frustration and decay. That's what we read. That's what happened at the fall. If you remove the fall's significance, it really undermines a lot of the Word. When you read the Bible with that context in mind, that there was a fall, it's significantly different. They have to just kind of dismiss it as well. He asked them not to eat in the tree, and well, they did it, and then we're going to call that sin, but really weakens what that was. I mentioned here, seeing a bullet, that Adam was not the first man. If you look, 1 Corinthians 15:45 will say that Adam was the first man. Not true if you believe in evolution. It weakens the cross of Christ. They have to come up with, well, it was still good that, of course Jesus died on the cross. That was a good thing. But, there's no way around the fact that it seriously weakens what that cross was, why he did that. He did that because of the separation that occurred at the fall. Again, getting back to the fall. Hugely significant. It weakens that we were made in his image. We have to believe something different there. They have to be creative. And what does that really mean? We see it as significant. God created the earth in 6 days, and then he created humans. That was a very significant thing. It undermines the redemption of Eden, as I have a second to last bullet there. This is significant because we see that's part of what Christ did on the cross. He was redeeming that relationship. And then we know at the end, heaven and earth are going to be destroyed, and he's really going to restore that relationship that he had with mankind in Eden. And then that last bullet, I read 1 Corinthians 15:26. It said, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Well, death was really a part of the development of humans and all animals over the years. According to evolution, death was a part of it. So it seems like odd to say that it's an enemy to be destroyed. So anyway, there's just a few items there about the theological issues, but that's really the most significant, even if you don't talk about the science. Huge theological issues here. That in itself is enough. But regarding science, we will continue on because we have some time. Here are some good questions to ask regarding evolution. I've come up with 3. Is it really settled science or scientific fact? We hear that 98% of scientists accept evolution, so you should too, because they call it a fact. Is it really? So that's one good question to ask. Another good question: are there aspects of the creation model that make evolution seem true? I'm going to talk a little bit about overlapping models. Last one: science changes and the word doesn't. All right, what's the trend? Is evolution getting better or worse? Even if it's not getting better or worse, that first statement there, science changes and the word doesn't. You can always just take a wait and see attitude here. But anyway, so those are the questions we're going to ask. We're going to start with that first one. Is it really settled science or scientific fact? Okay, so if you've been sitting in my class, you should know the answer to this. Evolution is a 2 words, start with an N. Hopefully you can remember those. A naturalistic narrative, all right? Or a better way to put it, perhaps, a narrative based on naturalism. Whichever of these 2 phrases you can remember. And if you don't remember these, go back to the old series. I'll put them in the post below, links below, to go and listen to those again. This is very important. Naturalism. The best way to remember naturalism is not supernatural, okay? So naturalism says we want to figure out how this happened without God's intervention at all. That's what evolution is. And evolution is a narrative. A narrative is a story. So this is a very important phrase to understand. It is a narrative, which is a story. It's based on naturalism, meaning God is not allowed to be a part of it. If you need a graphic, I had a couple graphics here. I want to bring these back up. God gets benched for being unscientific. If you can't test God, then we're not going to include him in the options. So he doesn't even get a play on the field. We're being told we have to accept evolution by people that won't even include him as an option. That picture I have on the right, I talked about this at length. I was at work. They had this team building exercise. We had to take a marshmallow and see how high we could get it off the table, but you could only use string tape and spaghetti noodles. Those were the only things you could use. So you're limited. We were limited to only use those things. Well, as believers, we're not limited to not use God. We don't see why you have to make that restriction. So just understand that. If you're somebody saying that you have to accept evolution because it seems true or people believe in it, and say they're going to believe it because that's the parameters that they have set for themselves, is you cannot invoke God in any way. And then should we be surprised at the narrative that they produce? Here's another good question, though, is to ask, if there were strong arguments against it, would the scientists still affirm evolution? And they like to use that term a lot. Would they? Absolutely. I mean, I've seen this. I've seen them work. I've seen the dialogue with them. They absolutely will. And a prime example, if you want to look into this, is abiogenesis, is the belief of this is chemicals coming together to create the first cell. They cannot really believe that biological evolution happened if you don't have a cell to begin with. But it turns out that this is extremely difficult, ridiculous to even believe in the more we study it. It's just ridiculous, and yet they accept that. So that to me is an answer to that. They absolutely will. So that doesn't tell us anything when I say, well, when they tell us that 98% of scientists believe it. They would believe it regardless. So then we get no information out of a statement like that. So anyway, so moving on. Question number 2. Are there aspects of the creation model that make evolution seem true? This question came about after years of really studying evolution. Something really dawned on me at one point, and that is this. The majority of arguments for evolution exist because the creation model is true. Really, after years and years of studying this, early on as I was searching and reading this, studying this, and looking at the creation model, I'm saying, absolutely, that explains it. It helps to understand the concept of overlapping models. There are multiple things that can explain a phenomenon. If I walk outside and I see my driveway is wet, obviously it rained. Well, rain is one explanation. There are others. I could add a broken sprinkler that went over the driveway instead, or somebody washed a car. There are multiple competing hypotheses here, and evolution isn't just the only one. Scientists are comparing evolution to not evolution. I compare evolution to creation. And when I include that model, I say, okay, that explains a lot of what we see. And I'll give you some examples. We believe in speciation as creationists. We believe in speciation. We believe in natural selection and adaptation. Okay, adaptation is a very important thing that God built into the animals. He made the hare or the rabbit adaptable. When they left the ark, they were going to spread throughout the earth. Some of these went to deserts, and the coat of the rabbit matched, camouflaged better there. Ones that went to an Arctic region had lighter colored coats. That was all built in. So God created adaptation. And as they separated and as they got different, speciation occurred. And we call them separate species. And this is all by natural selection. So that's all part of the creation model. Fossils make much better sense. When you look at the fossil record, it makes better sense from the global flood. It explains the fossils. I don't have time to get into that. Antibiotic resistance is often thrown out as examples of evolution. Well, that's an example of the creation model. Similarity and commonality. This is a huge one that evolutionists use for their reason for believing. Say, look at this as common. Look, whether it's DNA or features, or look at this similarity, and they can create it. They can organize it into a nested hierarchy. Well, the creation model says, yeah, there's going to be similarity and commonality. That doesn't. That's not only a part of the evolutionary model. In fact, if God's going to create stuff, then somebody else is going to come along and say, oh, look, there's similarity. So this is a part of the creation model. So again, as we're being told you should believe in evolution, this is by people who don't even consider this model. Our model explains the very things that they're using to try to tell us to believe in evolution. There's no reason to believe in evolution. I mean, it just removes all that. So once again, it's very important to understand this concept. I have it highlighted in this box. The majority of arguments for evolution exist because the creation model is true. So this gets back to the very question at the very beginning of this was, should we believe in evolution? No, based on that right there. All right, last one. Science changes, the word doesn't. That is a very important concept to understand. We have seen science change over the years. And even if we feel a great amount of pressure right now, we should just have a wait-and-see approach. But I do want to talk a little bit about the trend here. All right? And what I have seen, I've seen four trends. One, let me back up, a decreasing impact of some of the strongest evidence. We're going to show you some examples there. I've seen an increase in the challenges to evolution. I've seen an increase in the vocalization of neo-Darwinism challenges to the concept of neo-Darwinism by evolutionists themselves. They're coming out and admitting that neo-Darwinism is insufficient. Last one, I want to tell you, ironically, there is an increase in the numbers of people that are accepting evolution. So we're gonna go over that in a little bit. Okay, let's talk about this first one, and I gotta explain this. This is just I made a graph and I made this curving green line. There's nothing scientific about this line. It wasn't based on data, but it's just a concept that I want you to understand. Across the bottom is a time frame, about 1990s. This is when I first started really following evolution, was back in the 90s. So back in the 90s, early 2000s, I'll put my mouse in here to highlight it. I don't know if it was quite this increase, but right around the turn of the century, right around the early 2000s time frame here, there were some items here that were very compelling for evolution. I don't want to get too technical about them, but I could probably throw it out real quick. You could research these. Percentage of junk DNA. There was a belief that early on, 98% of our DNA was junk left over from evolution. It didn't do anything. Back in this time frame, They believed that 98% of our DNA was really useless. It didn't do anything. And that made a lot more sense in an evolution frame than the creation model. We didn't really have a good answer other than, well, maybe there's a function for this stuff. Until then, that was a very compelling argument for evolution. Another one was that early studies had like a 98%, 99% similarity of DNA between ape and man, modern ape and man. And a 99% similarity. This would be because evolution is true and that we had the same ancestor. Another compelling evidence. Number of pseudogenes. Pseudogenes are just genes that were left over that aren't used anymore that we see in us. And then maybe we see other animals have that same gene that is no longer used, and they called them pseudogenes. And that was compelling evidence right around that time frame. Right around this time frame here. But here's what's interesting is these numbers are going down. The percentage of junk DNA, the percentage of DNA comparisons between ape and man, the number of pseudogenes have been going down. In fact, they've been going down at a rate that these aren't, I wouldn't use these as arguments for evolution. In fact, I kind of showed this line here. If this is an arbitrary line of above would be pro-evolution, the bottom would be against evolution. They're starting to dip into these, I think, are going to be a problem. The more we realize that our DNA has function, the more we study that, more we realize there's a potential that it could all have function. If it all has function, evolutionists have a real problem. All right? When the comparison between ape and man increases, that is going to become a real problem for them because there's not enough time in history. Even if you had 1 million years, might not be enough time to make this significant amount of changes to the DNA. So that's, as pseudogenes, we're finding fewer and fewer pseudogenes to where they're starting to call them pseudogenes, believe it or not. But that's a whole other topic. You can study these three on your own. But the point I wanted to make is right around the turn of the century, there was a lot of pressure, and there were a lot of Christians who caved into this pressure. A lot of theistic evolutionists, a lot of books being written by them, organizations like BioLogos coming out, trying to convince Christians you should believe in evolution. And they use these topics here for that. What you could have said to them back then is, wait and see. That would have been the best statement to tell anybody back then. And as it turns out, that would have been a smart thing to do. Okay, if you were in a stock market, you should really buy this stock. It's going up. You could say, well, wait and see. Today, you need to sell that stock. Okay, if you've bought stock into theistic evolution, you need to sell it now, because that's the trend for topics like these. Okay. Another trend, and this is just kind of a graphic I'm showing to visually get you to understand the concept here, and that what I would say challenges to evolution. I listed here 3: devolution, irreducible complexity, and genetic entropy. Understand this: we are getting better at mapping genomes. We are mapping these genomes, putting them in databases, sharing them publicly, adding more to these databases. So the number of databases mapping is increasing, and that allows us to actually see what's going on, track what's going on. Not only that, the technology to map genomes is also increasing. That's why I showed this curve here, because what we're finding is more and more examples of devolution. That's a topic, if you're interested, you could research. What it's saying is the very mechanism of natural selection acting on mutation, supposed to create things like fins and lungs and eyes and wings. The very mechanism might also get rid of eyes and might get rid of wings. In the right in various settings, it will get rid of stuff. And we're seeing more and more examples of devolution. We're tracking and keeping track of these. And that's a problem. If your very mechanism that's trying to increase complexity might even work against the increasing of complexity itself. So you could say it this way: neo-Darwinism, evolution has a problem, and it's called neo-Darwinism. The very process that's supposed to create things is also getting rid of things when it decides it, or when natural selection removes things, and they don't come back very easily. It's much easier to get rid of stuff. Irreducible complexity is just the concept that there are steps along the evolutionary path where a big jump needs to occur. Okay, that's all this is. It's a big jump. If you need to get a very complex eye, if you're going to the next level of complex eye, we know that there's various levels of complex eyes, but to jump to a next eye that's working, there's a lot that needs to be in place. A real good example is blood clotting system. This is a system. If the whole system doesn't work, an animal could die by a poorly made blood clotting system that clots when it shouldn't, or doesn't stop clotting when it should stop clotting. Those kind of things. Until the whole system, the triggering mechanism, when to blood clot, how long to blood clot, when to stop blood clotting, and when to take away the tissue, all needs to be working as a system. So the concept of irreducible complexity is that we're seeing things that too many mutations need to occur that evolution neo-Darwinism can select for. So that's a significant problem, and we're finding more and more. We're finding an increase in those. Genetic entropy is just one. It's still kind of early at this stage, but what we're seeing is mutations are building up in humans, in other animals. Mutations are building up. Well, in the creation model, we've only been around for 6,000 years. And mutations are slowly building up in us. We're getting worse, and we're going to go extinct. This is one that we're going to start tracking more and more in the future. We're going to see that we are actually collecting some good data on genetic entropy. So again, we're just talking about trends. Now is not the time to believe in evolution. Okay, what was being discovered is already told you. Yeah, we need to wait and see. In fact, here's where the trend is going. Another trend is just the fact that evolutionists are increasingly willing to admit neo-Darwinism is insufficient to explain the complexity of life. Now, that's a big sentence, but understand, for years, neo-Darwinism was the mechanism. Up into the 80s, I remember sitting in class, mutations acting on natural selection acting on mutations was it. That's how we explain everything. It was a great concept, A mistake comes along, throw out the bad ones and keep the good ones. Sounds great. Today, all honest scientists will admit that neo-Darwinism is insufficient to explain the complexity of life that we see. They admit it, sometimes publicly, sometimes not, but they know it. And their answer, well, we're looking at other things to prop it up. Neutral theory and various other things that they try to throw out. In fact, right here, there was a meeting in 2016, very significant meeting by a Royal Society titled New Trends in Evolutionary Biology. They were admitting, they said, okay, we got a problem. We need to be looking for other solutions. That's what this meeting was about. To this day, I find articles. Every now and then, the honest ones will admit it. So just a few weeks ago, an article, Do We Need a New Theory of Evolution? That's a pretty bold statement there, saying that we have a problem. Okay? Like I said, they don't admit it very often, but every now and then they do. This was just found. I found this one just last Thursday. Neo-Darwinism must mutate to survive. Kind of a play on the concept of mutating to survive. Saying even the concept of Neo-Darwinism is failing. So I just want, again, the trend is, if you have not bought into it, don't buy that stock, okay? Now is not the time to buy that stock. So, but speaking of trends, unfortunately, there's this odd trend right here. The number of people accepting evolution has been slowly on the increase. You know what? I don't know if this is where that was back in the 99. It might have been a little bit lower, but it's just been this slow increase up into 50%. And just last year, within 6 months ago, I remember seeing a report, and I thought, okay, starting now, this line is going to start increasing all the more. And what was it? Crossing the 50% line. Now, 51% accept evolution, or I've already seen the news articles. Most accept evolution. They're starting to make that phrase, they're putting that phrase out there. Once they got 51%, they're doing it. They tell people most people accept evolution. And when you do that, that's going to convince a lot more people. So just be aware of that trend. You're going to see this number continue to increase. And that's just because people aren't aware. And they're accepting it. You've got young people that have been indoctrinated on it. And more young people accepting that. So a big thing to remember, though, is regarding evolution, at a minimum, take a wait-and-see approach. Okay, so in conclusion, right off the bat, evolution comes with serious theological issues. Serious enough that we don't even need to look at the science. Science changes and the word doesn't. You could have just stopped right there. Those are so significant. Our love for God and our love for His Word, our respect for God and His Word, it should be enough to say, let's not go there. What happened at the fall was hugely significant. And it's hard to read the New Testament without the context that there was a fall of Adam. There was an Adam and Eve, and there was a fall. So that should answer your question right there. But still, we looked at evolution from a scientific perspective, and I came up with what I thought were some good questions to ask. And hopefully we got some good answers there. So anyway, folks, 30 minutes. We wrapped it up here. So that was it. Hope you guys can come out to my next class. All right, bye.